You're listening to the Why Japan podcast with Michael Tang. Hi everyone, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Why Japan podcast. Every episode, I interview a new guest who lives in Japan, starting with probably the most asked question for all foreigners living in Japan: why Japan? It's been a while since I've released an episode. I was caught between moving apartments, so things have been quite hectic. In other news, Japan has officially hit typhoon season, so it's been raining pretty hard. Combined with the super strong winds, it's been a little crazy. I hope everyone is safe during this season. Nevertheless, as always, if you enjoy the podcast, please do the usual, such as liking the podcast, subscribing to it, sharing it on your social media or other platforms. Anything you do would be super appreciated. Let your friends know that they can find us at whyjapanpodcast.com. Today's guest is Seralyn Campbell. Seralyn has lived in Japan for quite some time now. First starting off working as an English teacher, switching to odd jobs here and there, then jumping to managing Japan's highest paid and most known model. In this episode, we talk a little bit about her upbringing, her move to Japan, and her career. I think she has tremendously interesting insights into different aspects of Japanese culture that my previous guests haven't touched upon. Without further ado, here's episode 6 with Seralyn Campbell. Welcome to the show, Seralyn, to the Why Japan podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I should be the one to say it. We're in Seralyn's apartment here in Koenji, which is a beautiful area of Tokyo. I've never been here before. Really lively, a lot of people, everyone's fashionable, and we're in your awesome apartment right now.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you over. It's nice to be able to do things like this in the comfort of your own home, for obvious reasons, but also during these uncertain times, it's certainly safer than being in a public space. So it's happy to have you over, and I'm glad we can finally get together to do this.
So, Seralyn, you know the name of the podcast, it's Why Japan, where I ask my guests how they ended up in Japan. You've been in Japan for quite some time now. You've had quite a history of different professions and things that you've done. Could you give our listeners self-introduction?
Sure. So my name is Seralyn Campbell, and I was born and raised in the Mississippi River Delta, just south of Memphis. I have had a very winding path to my life. I ended up moving to Memphis, Tennessee when I was around 19 or 20. I had to escape the countryside. It's not a bad place, but it is not a place that I fit in very well. So I went to Memphis and I waited tables for a while, and it was totally randomized. I was on Craigslist looking for a printer cable and came across a posting to be an English teacher in the southern island of Kyushu. I said, screw it. I applied and I ended up getting it. So
on Craigslist?
On Craigslist in Memphis, Tennessee, of all places. So a few months later, went to Kyushu, Japan, and had an apartment and a car and a little English school where I was the only teacher, and things were going well. And I had a kind of family issue back home that required my personal attention, so I ended up having to cut that endeavor short. I was only about 3 or 4 months into it at the time. Came back, dealt with the issue, ended up moving to New York City a few years later. I really was into wine at the time and decided I wanted to be a sommelier. So I moved to New York City for 4 years and studied to become a sommelier, and I did accomplish that goal, but I became a little disillusioned with the industry. It's a great industry, there's a lot of great people, but I started doing wine professionally because I had a passion for wine. And once I started working with it every day, it started looking like inventory, profit margins, and I started to lose the romance I had for it. So I decided to, as one does after being a sommelier in New York City, move back to Memphis, Tennessee and go to art school. And I did that for a few years. At the time, I was thinking to myself, I really want to live abroad. I'm young. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and I was thinking, the older I get, the less likely I will be to make this leap and forsake my entire security and safety network, everyone I know, languages I firmly understand. And I knew that the older I got, the less likely I'd be to do that. So I decided to move to Barcelona. I spoke Spanish at the time, and I was studying painting. And if you're not aware, Barcelona is a big art city. So I thought to myself, Barcelona it is. And I ended up meeting someone who became very special to me. And that person was not really into the idea of moving to Barcelona. So every few weeks I would go up and poke them and say like, hey, how about Paris? Hey, how about Berlin? Hong Kong? No. Hey, how about Tokyo? Yes. What? Okay. So Tokyo it is. I changed my major to Japanese to try and aid my future endeavors. I'd gotten enough education in painting to continue teaching myself. Saved up for a year and a half, sold everything we owned, and bought a one-way ticket to Tokyo. I had no job lined up, no visa, no apartment. We had, I think, 6 days worth of an Airbnb in which we had to find, procure, and move into an apartment without really speaking Japanese. Somehow that happened. By the way, if you decide to move to Japan, I highly recommend you not take the route I took. You should prepare much more fully.
And Seralyn, you're a very special case. I mean, I feel like you've had impossible situations, and almost every single time you somehow, some way gotten over them.
It does certainly feel like that, especially in retrospect. You know, at the time, I felt like I knew what I was doing, and looking back, I was clearly fumbling in the dark. But I've had a lot of unique opportunities, especially in Japan. Japan has been very good to me in that way, in terms of my career. I've had a lot of opportunities that people would kill for, including myself included, and they just kind of fell in my lap. You know, a lot of the unique experiences I've found myself in have fallen into my lap through sheer dumb luck, but I like to believe that I've held on to those situations through merit. So yeah, it's been very coincidental as to how a lot of things in my life have occurred, but maintained, I like to think that I had some part to play in that.
So you ended up in Japan after moving your whole life from Spain. You had no job lined up. You had nothing. You didn't know what was next.
I had no idea. I came here and I was looking at, I had to make sure I had a visa so that it was legal to stay here. And if anyone listening is not aware, once you enter Japan as a tourist, you have 90 days before you need to leave. And you also need to show proof of exit before they even let you in. So before coming, I made sure to buy a ticket to Thailand as a backup in hopes of, canceling the ticket once I'd procured a visa of some sort. So I actually did sign up to go to a Japanese language school because I knew that would be integral. My ability to understand the language would be integral to my success here. So I signed up for the language school, and I did get cleared for an educational visa, but it didn't kick in until a 1 month after my flight would have been to Thailand. So I did end up needing to take that flight and come back and reset my tourist visa. And then my educational visa kicked in. And when I finished with my Japanese language school 9 months later, I started freelance English teaching, and I ended up being an instructor at a Japanese fashion college called Modogakuen. It's that big, I don't know if you've seen the...
Oh, it's the big one in Shinjuku?
Tower. Yeah. I used to teach there.
Wow. I've always seen it, and I always tell people that's a fashion school. I've never been there, but I always tell people, yeah.
Yeah, there's actually 3 colleges in there. The bottom third is a medical school. The middle is a design school, and the top is a fashion school. So I taught at the design and fashion schools for a little while, and I was only teaching a few nights a week there, so I was also freelance English teaching, just like meeting people in cafes, teaching them that way.
When you're at the fashion school, were these with other students? You're teaching students, or were you teaching like faculty?
No, so I was teaching classes to the students.
Okay, gotcha.
Usually it'd be things like business English as it pertains to the fashion industry, getting them prepared for the sort of vocabulary and phrasing they would encounter if they had foreign clients, just increasing their confidence in using English in their work.
And you were in your late 20s around this time, maybe?
This time I would have been, probably 29, 30, something like that, maybe 31 possibly. But yeah, somewhere in that general vicinity. And while I was doing that, I got approached through a regular channel that I use to obtain new private clients. It was a pretty weird situation, actually. I had a guy who would connect me with Japanese people who wanted to learn English, and we would usually meet and have a kind of trial lesson to see, for me to assess their level and for them to see how they feel about me as a teacher. And normally we would set these trial lessons up weeks in advance. And I'm the sort of person who likes to know ahead of time what I'll be doing as much as possible. I know that the way that I moved to Japan doesn't really indicate that, but in terms of daily life, I'm not a sort of off-the-cuff person. I'm like, oh, you want to meet? Let's do it next Tuesday at 7 p.m.
Right, let's plan it all out.
Right, I don't want to, hit me up and let's go hang out. I'm not that type of person typically. The guy who connected me with students was like, hey, I know you like to have advance notice, but I have a student who wants a trial lesson, and they're already in the area that you're in, and they'd like to take one in the next 2 or 3 hours. And I was like, I normally would pass that up, but I was like, screw it, I'm already out. Might as well pick up a client if I can. So I went and met this person, and it was quite a curious situation. It was this lady, and her English was quite good, actually, and I was like wondering why she needed me. And she explained that she was finding a teacher for her little sister. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So at the end of, her asking me all these questions, and she was asking me some very random questions, how I felt about international travel, and if I had any connections to various industries and things. And I was like, what? This is a very curious client. And at the very end of the 45-minute trial lesson, she said, I'm so sorry. I feel really bad. I have not been entirely truthful with you. And I was like, okay, what?
Right. What do you mean?
What are you getting at? And she's like, well, it wasn't for my sister. I actually work for a talent company, and I was vetting some people to teach English to one of our talents. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. You have my attention. What's going on? And she said, we've been looking for the right person. We've tried 6 people, and nobody's really worked out. No one's really meshed with our client. So you seem like the sort of person that might mesh with her. So I was like, all right. So we just told the Japanese guy that was the connector that it didn't work out, and we I went to their talent management company, and then they all talked to me and vetted me. I still didn't know who I was meeting. And I was like, this is all very strange, but kind of curious.
You got me interested.
I'll go along with it and see where this road leads. Eventually, I ended up going to a cafe, which when I arrived, I thought I was the wrong place because the cafe was closed. And they assured me that was the right place on the phone. I was like, okay.
Seems like out of a movie, by the way.
Yeah, it was really weird. And so I go inside, and the staff, ushered me to some back room. And I was like, what is this? I found myself sitting across from a face I recognized, which was strange because I actually, though I've lived in Japan at this point, 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, I didn't really pay any attention to Japanese media. I don't watch Japanese TV. Right. It's not my style. It's not my thing. So I don't really pay much attention to it. I don't really know many Japanese celebrities, but there's only one that I did know because when I was attending that language school, beginning of my stay in Japan, someone told me that I looked like this person. And I was like, okay, who's this person? They showed me some videos, and I was like, interesting. Okay, I know a Japanese celebrity now. And it ended up being that exact same person. Her name is Rola in English and Rola in Japanese. And it was a very curious experience because I didn't really have a lot of experience interacting with people who were famous at that point. All I knew is I wanted to... I'm not really an ass kisser, right?
Right.
And so, when she's like, hi, I'm Rola. I was like, I'm sorry, Pola? And she's like, no, Rola. And I was like, oh, it's nice to meet you. They said you worked at the Family Mart? And she was like, no, I'm a model. I was like, oh, a model for the Family Mart. And she's like, no. She was just freaking out because everyone in Japan acts so ingratiated towards her, and that like she hung the moon. And I was determined to not play along with that. So I just kept messing with her. And we just chatted, and, a lot of places I could help her with her English, to put it kindly. She ended up asking me to meet her again and ended up being her English teacher for a while.
You guys clicked?
We did. We clicked pretty well. Our personalities meshed. I mean, our personalities are quite different, but they fit together nicely. And she kind of got my sense of humor a little bit more than most Japanese do. Most Japanese don't pick up on sarcasm to save their lives. It's just not a part of their culture.
100%.
Yeah, right. I mean, how many times have you, it's been like a storm and you're like, beautiful weather today, and people are like, but it's raining.
Yeah. It just goes over their heads.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
I don't know. It's not, sarcasm isn't a vein of humor that runs strong here. I think that they kind of recognized my other skill sets. I was also a photographer, and I'd run my own business back in Memphis for a little while. So I had a little bit of, business negotiating experience and things like that. And they asked me to be her manager for foreign affairs. She had 3 other managers that were handling contracts, daily life things in Japan, and they asked me to be her manager.
So there's 4 managers to 1 talent.
Well, for her.
Right.
Most for talents who are aspiring, 1 manager will manage 20 talents. But as
she was the top.
She was very busy. Not a day went by when we didn't have a TV show or, a recording of some kind or an audition, something. There's always something going on. So an event, a party. We just, it took 4 of us to manage her life. That's how busy she was.
And for those who don't know, Rola is probably the most popular, Japan's top model, like the quintessential top model. Even now, literally today, on the way coming here to your apartment, you could see her face on billboards and advertisements and things like that. If you walk into any beauty clinic or pharmacy or anything that sells makeup or whatever, her face or her endorsement is on a product. She is like
Japanese Kylie Jenner in terms of vibe, not so much in terms of what she does. I mean, she does do fashion modeling, things like that as well. But I mean, it's hard to say because, the reason that I think that the thing that really launched her career is that she ended up getting a lot of advertising contracts at the same time. When I was managing her in 2016, at that time, she was the spokesperson for 26 different companies at the same time. So you can't, you can't really go anywhere without seeing her face, which was really weird to me.
Even now, I feel like she's around. I mean, maybe not as at the peak, but she is still around. She's now, I think, doing her own thing. But when she was focused on being a talent, she was everywhere. I mean, I remember watching her on TV back in the States 10 years ago. Seeing her on billboards and advertisements now is still very kind of awesomeness to think. So for the listeners who don't know, she is up there.
And she's a very recognizable face in this country, certainly. Japan, really, most of what they do is oriented toward themselves rather than the international market. And I think that if that were not the case, she might be more recognizable outside of Japan. But that's also why they brought me onto the team. The idea was to try to find a way to translate her fame in Japan into the Western market, specifically the United States, which is why they wanted an American to teach her English rather than a British or Australian, just because they wanted her to be able to infiltrate the American market. Because for better or worse, if you're famous in the United States, you tend to be famous everywhere because of the power of the media. The U.S., does some things well and other things poorly, but no one can argue that it's not a media powerhouse. The idea was to get her fame translated into the United States, hoping that it would launch her into a sort of worldwide career. We enjoyed some measure of success at that effort, but certainly not what we had hoped. There were hurdles along the way, most of them which were cultural, which was not what I expected. But, I became her manager, and we worked together for a while, enjoying a very interesting lifestyle. We were on we lived on airplanes. We were in different countries every other few days. Paris Fashion Week, relaxing in the Maldives, New Year's party in Switzerland, a vacation in Peru, going to Tulum for a photo shoot. Like, it's just we lived on airplanes. And then there came a point where her management company got to be very controlling, and we called them out on some of their less than honest practices, and they basically said, deal with it, it's not going to change. And they had her on a very unorthodox 10-year contract. I think they foresaw what she was going to become when she was younger and tried to lock her down to be able to profit from her in the long term. And they did achieve that. So at some point, we were feeling like everything we were saying got back to them. We didn't understand how. And it turned out that we were being followed by Japanese paparazzi.
Wow.
And listened to in cafes. And so we started feeling like, where can we go to talk? So we went to LA, where she has an apartment, and found that there were even Japanese photographers following us around there.
That's insane.
It is insane. It's absolutely insane.
That's insane.
Yeah, they would even, I don't know if I'll step into the full aspect of this, but I mean, there was a point where a paparazzi magazine asked me to meet with them in hopes of me confirming some of their conspiracy theories about her. And they showed me photos of myself in my bathrobe on Rola's balcony in LA drinking coffee. And I'm just like, this is so freaking creepy. I only went to that meeting to find out what they were hoping to publish about her so that I could get that information to her lawyers before it became an issue, because it's never anything that's substantiated. It's always like crazy claims. So we wanted to find a place where we could go and speak freely. So we went to Paris and didn't tell the management company. And they were normally very well apprised of our movements. That's their main asset. So of course they want to know where she is and what she's doing as much as possible. But we needed to get out from under their thumbs. So we went to Paris and to have to have a meeting without the fear of being overheard about what her next move should be and how we should get out of this bad situation. And when we got back to Japan, they were like, we know you were in Paris. And I was like, what are you talking about? And of course, some people in Paris recognized her, took photos, tagged her, and then they were looking at her tags and saw me walking near her or something. And I was like, shit. They were like, why didn't you tell us? And I was like, my loyalty is to her, not to you. And then they're like, we're the ones paying your checks. I was like, I'm aware of that. But my answer stays the same. They fired me. And I called her up and I was like, Rola, they fired me. And she's like, just chill, buckle down for a few days. We'll figure this out. So she calls me a few days later and she's like, all right, I'm going to hire you out of pocket to do the same job you've been doing, which made me very happy because working at that Japanese company was it was excruciating in some ways. I had to make all of these reports that had no meaning. I don't think anyone even read. A lot of paperwork that was unnecessary.
Kind of sounds very Japanese.
Yeah, super
like
Japanese.
Stereotypical Japanese company.
Right. I got out from under their thumb, did the same job I've been doing, but with far less paperwork and the same pay, So I was like, she was like, what were they even paying you? I don't know. I was like, it was this. She's like, all right, I'll pay you that. And I was like, that's fine. So continued our little stint together, and I stayed with her in her apartment in LA for a while. we ended up finding that we didn't mesh as well as roommates as we did as friends. We got a little frustrated with each other a few times, and I was feeling like, I was missing my family back here in Japan. Not, and for clarity, not my blood family, my chosen family. There's 2 people that I've lived with for a number of years. And that if you say family, they're the first faces that pop into my mind. We decided to give it a break, and I started doing freelance photography and casting and things. I ended up getting recruited to do a pretty interesting job for a company called VRS. And we ended up doing a Asian and European tour that lasted several months. I was tired of being on the road all the time. It was the same thing with when I was with Rola. I just wanted to have my own life again and not live out of a suitcase. I mean, I was just constantly on the road. And I don't mean to sound ungrateful, because I'm very grateful for the experiences I've had and the travels I've gotten to do through work. Having a job with travel is very important to me when I was younger. No matter what it is that you think you want, there's a limit to how much of it you can actually take. And as much as I love travel and seeing the new places, it's exhausting not being able to sleep in your own bed for 7 months in a row and living out of a suitcase for the better part of a year, and not being able to visit a single friend or, even have the mental wherewithal to even, ask how they're doing. Your work is your life, and it started to consume me. So I pulled out of that. And a few months later, Rola hit me up and she's like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm doing great. How are you?" And she's like, "I miss you. Let's hang out." I was like, "Sure. Are you in Tokyo?" She's like, "No, I'm in LA." And I was like, "Well, how are we going to hang out?" And then 5 minutes later, there was a plane ticket sent to my line account. So I was like, all right. I mean, the number of times where just, even when the lady interviewed me and the English at the McDonald's in Shibuya to find out if I might be an appropriate English teacher for her, she's like, "How do you feel about sudden international travel?" I was like, "Bring it." There was so many moments where, like, for example, we would be on an 18-hour shoot, and at hour 17, when I'm so excited to go home, and by home, I mean hotel, and get some rest. This is when we were partially based in LA, and they'd be like, "Here's a plane ticket that leaves in 3 hours. Make sure you're on the plane. It's going to New York. Rola's going to be walking in the Alexander Wang show, and you need to have these." I'm like, okay. Work a 17-hour day, go straight to the airport. Someone else has been arranged to pack my bags for me. Don't even know who, scared to ask. Thanks for the extra underwear. And then, my bags arrive at the airport. We get on a plane. It's just an insane lifestyle.
The supermodel lifestyle.
Yeah, and I'm not a supermodel, right?
Right.
So, I'm this dorky girl from Mississippi who likes cameras and space and lizards and stuff, So, you always see this sort of lifestyle in movies and things, and you have to wonder, is it real? Do people really live that way?
And they do.
They do, and it's insane. Because the town I'm from is tiny, Michael. There's no stoplight, no police station, gravel roads. If not for the internet, I would probably be a farmer's wife by now.
I really can't imagine. But, kind of talking about just that, you were saying there's nothing but internet. The whole podcast is Why Japan, but it ended up just being Why Japan because you were looking for something on Craigslist. You saw a job opening, and then you just took it. And from there, it's led you down to different roads and back to Japan into this very unique situation of being a manager for Japan's top supermodel. Your life just kind of changed just by simply applying for this job opening that was on Craigslist,
It's strange. It's really weird. You never know where life's going to take you, even when you think you have a strong guess, I mean, when I went to Japan the first time, I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed many aspects of how different it was. When it came time to choose the next place, and I had been eyeballing Barcelona, I was excited when Tokyo was what was chosen, because I kind of felt in the back of my mind like I wasn't really done with Japan. I went there and I gave it a try, and I got yanked out prematurely, and I felt like I wasn't finished with Japan, and certainly Japan wasn't finished with me. I didn't know that until later. But, if I had to sum up why I came here rather than another place, besides the fact that my partner at the time was okay with it, in a word, I would say adventure. For a Japanese person, Japan isn't much of an adventure, but as an American, I wanted to live in a first world country that had a culture that was as different from my own as possible. I can think of no more appropriate place than Japan. Japan's methodology, thinking styles, so societal norms and culture could not be more polar opposite from American in so many ways.
Yeah, it's inverted and reversed and flipped, and
even the language, verbs come at the end of a sentence. And
everything about it is different.
It really is. A lot of things that I had been taught were good or that I ought to do my whole life in order to make myself appear polite or to market myself in a good way, are interpreted as rude in Japan and vice versa.
Social norms are completely
it's
flipped.
very, very different.
Hugging and shaking hands or bowing, for example, is just, yeah, we
don't hug in Japan. And like, for example, when you go to get a job, if you talk about all the things you're good at, you're looked at as egotistical and not a good fit.
Right.
It's almost
you're not part of the, you're not a group mentality. This person won't fit in the group.
And yet if you don't do that in the United States, you're perceived as weak and not understanding your own value or else not having much. So, there's so much to learn about navigating the waters of Japan as an American specifically, because we really, even the language, I studied linguistics in a very base sense for a little while because I've always been interested in foreign languages. And I've come to understand that particularly American English is a very high context language, whereas is a very low context language, whereas Japanese is a very high context language. That means, if you're not familiar with the concepts, is that we say everything explicitly in English. And in Japanese, you might say the subject of what you're talking about once and then just say a bunch of verbs after that. And if someone walks in the middle of a conversation, you might hear fast, strong, and beautiful, but not know what it is they're talking about. And a lot of things in Japanese language are left to contextual understanding. People speak to each other the way that they do with the understanding that people know the context behind the conversation without explicitly saying what it is.
Right. And that could be very confusing.
It's extremely confusing.
Especially if you're talking about multiple subjects, because suddenly you could be talking about something different, and oftentimes I'll find myself kind of lost and having to kind of re-clarify, wait, we're talking about this, right? Because sometimes it could change in a heartbeat. You wouldn't even know it. I think it takes a long time to get used to that and learn how to follow along and keep up with the pace. But coming from a Western, particularly American culture, it's so opposite.
It's
so
polar opposite. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a business meeting and requested that someone use a noun. Could you please say what it is you're talking about?
Right. I can't read your mind.
Yeah. And, they'll just be like, it's a great idea. I'm like, what is a great idea? Please just say it explicitly. And so I ended up going back to LA. I went to LA to visit Rola, and we just, wanted to hang. She just wanted to hang out and chill, and I was not doing anything at the moment. So I just hung out with her for a while. And we, kind of remembered how good of friends we were. I overheard her talking about some business matter she had with her management company in the U.S. And I was like, hey, sorry to butt in, but I think you should handle this matter in this way. I think that it would be foolish not to, and you need to attack it from this angle. And they were like, oh, that's really good insight. Right before I left, she asked me if I would be her American manager. And like, you want to give this another go? And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing anything. I miss you. Let's do this. So I went back to Japan and gathered my things and rebased myself in LA for a while. I mean, my apartment was still here in Quincy. My lizards, all my stuff, but I just had to spend and just think of it as an extended work trip because she was basing herself out of LA at the time. Anyway, I ended up doing that until July of last year, and then a similar, it's a repeat process. She and I do very well together up until a point, and then we need to separate for a while. It's just that we have a point where we start to rub each other the wrong way, but up until that moment, it's beautiful, but that moment always comes. Yeah. So we actually ended up, working together 3 separate times.
It's kind of like on again, off again.
It really is, We do adore each other. She's one of my closest friends, and she's rooting for me in my current endeavors. And I've just applied for a job as a public affairs specialist at NASA. A lifelong dream of mine to work for them. It's just one of those things that you never think that one does not simply work at NASA. You don't just, you might want that, but you don't expect you can ever really do that. That's where I'm at now, and I'm just doing some coding and astrophotography and hoping I get this job at NASA. That's the shortest possible story of how I ended up where I am that I can imagine telling.
I guess some background story time for our listeners out there. They might be wondering, how on earth does Michael know someone like Seralyn? And I think it's such a small world because at the time when you were based out in LA, just a little bit over a year ago, I was still working at an English language company. This particular company wasn't doing that great. They were laying off a bunch of people. They're firing a bunch of people. They just really wanted to change the staff. and they were short-staffed at their school, and I was based out in their main office. And basically, I always wanted to work with students directly, so I volunteered to be temporarily based out of the school. I remember it almost clear as day, where you just walked up the steps and you came in and you were just talking about different programs and things like that. You're kind of also doing what that person did to you at the McDonald's. You're kind of like scoping around and you're asking a bunch of questions, and I was just like, is this person interested in being a student, or like what's their deal? Like, their English is like perfect. Like, I'm not really sure what they're asking. Like, who is this for? Like, what is this about? And I remember you were just asking about our programs, and I was just kind of answering them. And you said you had to go back to Tokyo or Japan. And I said, oh, you live in Japan? And, I said, oh, like, I studied there. And you started talking, and then we really kind of connected. And I had asked who it was. And the moment you showed me on Instagram who it was, you said, like, let me find a picture. You'll know who she is. And I saw the photo, and it blew my mind. Because I was watching Rola on TV, I think like 10 years ago, when I was studying Japanese and I was watching a bunch of Japanese TV shows, and she would often appear on these variety shows. I mean, she kind of still does a little bit now, but maybe not as much as before. But she was on all these different shows, and I remember seeing her, and I was like, wait, no way, you're the manager for her? It's such a small world, because I wasn't based at the school all the time, so for you to walk in on that day, kind of the stars aligned, the world is really a small place where I never imagined I would be able to, become friends with, for the listeners out there, I've been to IKEA with Seralyn. We were at IKEA together. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, it was kind of like that for you in your journey to Japan, was that prior to coming to Japan and seeing that job listing on Craigslist, you didn't particularly have a desire or interest to say, I want to move to Japan, I want to live in Japan, I want to do this in Japan. It was just, you ended up here.
That's a good way to put it.
And that wraps up episode 6 of the Why Japan podcast with Michael Tang. Talking with Seralyn was such an amazing opportunity, and I hope you enjoyed it. We have a Patreon if you're interested in supporting the show. Please visit patreon.com/whyjapanpodcast. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram at Why Japan Podcast. I hope you tune in to next week's episode of the Why Japan podcast with Michael Tang. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.